Okay, folks, I think we're going to reconvene here and we're going to pick up with public comment. We had one last set of public comments before we turn back to our regularly scheduled agenda. So Chris, over to you. We're in your hands.
Thank you. And again, my apologies for my late submission there, and I really appreciate the opportunity to address the commission. Basically, I'd like to, we covered a lot of ground there in this period for public comments, so I'm going to comment on a number of things, but they all kind of relate back, I think, to my main theme of the discussion here, and it is that I think we are underutilizing the MSE process, and we could be getting a lot more from it and help us and help this process help commissioners and stakeholders who are making decisions at this table consider not just the short-term tactical implications of the decisions, but what it means over the long term. So that's what I'm sort of trying to work towards in my comments. First thing I'd like to mention is just that I have been on the MSAB since its inception, so I'm very familiar with the process. But at the same time, I've also been watching very closely and more closely recently. Up in Canada, we have we do for our sablefish fishery, it's an MSE process. So I've been watching that and seeing how that works. And also I've been directly involved with our yellow eye rockfish science, which uses closed loop simulations to test management procedures and to determine the rebuilding of the stock and what harvest levels should be. So I guess my message in that is that as I've become more involved in this, I've become more of sort of a fan of MSE and what it can do and how we can use it. And like I say, I think we're underutilizing what we could be doing with the investment we've made so far with some of the tools we've got. First comment I'd like to make is just, Commissioner Kurland, you asked why MSAB chose the SPR 46, and Dr. Hicks answered it, but I just want to expand one point on that. What we were looking at the time is we looked at 43 and 46, and it showed that SPR 46 did a better job, a lower probability of being below the B30. But when we looked at the differences in the TCUIs, when you put it in a confidence range of 25-75, there's no discernible difference. They overlap. So we were looking at it and saying, well, look, for roughly the same TCUI, we do a better job of staying off the ramp. So that was really a lot of the discussion there. I just wanted to clarify that. The other point is I just wanted to make is on the regulatory proposals. We heard some from Buck Lakaitis and from Malcolm Milne. And while I share their concerns, I don't support their approach. I don't agree with their approach. And I'll make a few comments on that. It's first of all, with respect to the harvest strategy policy, I think actually the interim harvest strategy policy, if you read it, there's actually a lot of good stuff in there. Everything that needs to be in there is in there. We've got a fishing intensity, we've got a harvest control rule, we've got definitions of when the stock is overfished or overfishing is occurring, when a trigger comes that the stock is overfished, and then you have to take management actions, and then also a point at when the stock's rebuilt, how that's determined. So I think a lot of that is covered in here. What I think is maybe not in there, what we need is what's our plan to move forward? That tells us sort of where we don't want to be. And so that was my one concern with some of their comments. I think the interim harvest strategy policy does cover a lot of it. The other thing is this talk of should we have a limit reference point or some kind of limit tied to absolute spawning biomass. And I disagree with that simply because as we heard from Dr. Stewart, that estimating spawning biomass using the stock assessment model can be very imprecise. You can overestimate, you can underestimate, and we've even seen and there's a confidence range in there, and we've seen just for the last few years, just because of change in the data, what we thought was when we were at last year 176 million pounds, it turns out once we've rerun it in this year, we're at 145. So that's my concern there, but I don't think also we know where we don't want to be. We've already got limit reference points, we've got cutoffs there. We need to focus more on where we want to be. And I think that we need more of a discussion on that. And that's where I think the MSE process and MSAP could really help us. And so that's the point I wanted to make is I think that is, because what you can do is once you figure out where you want to be, you can use those tools that Dr. Hicks has developed that we've invested in to look at the trade-offs. Okay, we want to get to a certain point. Over what time frame? What are the trade-offs to do that? What are the costs in terms of TCUI? So I don't want us to lose sight of that. Yes, what we need to do is we need to update the operating model, collaborate, make sure it's calibrated with the stock assessment. But then what we need to do is, when we were looking at things before, like the SPR 46, we're looking at them in terms of what I guess would be called average or normal productivity. We need to also have a scenario where we can look using that operating model of low or poor productivity, so lower recruitment, current size at age. So then you can say, okay, look, given this where we are right now, let's look at different things in the current environment. And then you can also look at, okay, if things return to normal, what would it look like over time? So we need a plan. We need to develop a plan using sort of basing it on what does it look like under a low productivity or poor productivity scenario, and plan for that, because that's the regime we're in right now. And we don't know how long it's going to last. Dr. Stewart sort of alluded to that. Even if there was strong recruitment, it's going to take years for that to come into play. So those are the points that I think I wanted to make. And the last point I just wanted to make is this: the last comment we had. Some people look at the decision table and they're saying, well, there's no real difference between status quo and status quo minus 15, and you go from a 10% probability of being below the limit reference point to just 8%. Well, that's actually a big difference. That's a 20% difference. That's a big difference. And I think that might be lost on some people, and I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in the discussion, because those are big differences, going from a probability of 10 to a probability of 8. Anyway, those were my comments. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for being accommodating too and doing this after lunch instead of shoehorned before. Any comments, Neil?
Well, first of all, I don't know if condolences, a plaque, what do you, since inception is a long time. I guess thinking about this absolute spawning biomass, because this is definitely a concept that's clearly sort of circulating in people's discussions. I understand the comment about the uncertainty in estimating that. I wonder your thoughts about, others have made the point, which I can see the sort of logic behind, about, us, if they're only relative reference points, sort of following the stock down, so to speak, where you're only really gauging the effective fishing pressure. So, what are your thoughts on that? And is there another way that you see, or that the MSAB has discussed, trying to stay away from sort of like a bad spot in absolute terms to avoid that pitfall with the relative reference points?
Okay, like I say, I think that a couple of things. First of all, a lot of the absolute spawning biomass discussion arose from a recommendation from the SRB. But if you actually read the recommendation from the SRB, what they're saying is pick an absolute spawning biomass of where you want to be. It's trying to encourage us to go to where we want to be. And in regards to your question about, yes, the relative spawning biomass will scale up and down with productivity. But I think it's with absolute spawning biomass, we can end up going below that. No matter what the limit is, it's again, being able to look and say, okay, look, this is being able to simulate and saying, this is where we want to be, and understanding, okay, we need to harvest at this level to stay away from these reference points, but also get to in the direction we want to go. And I think if we're doing that, it will help us stay away from a limit, whether it's an absolute level or a relative level.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Thanks, Chris. We'll release you.
Thank you.
Party reports. And I think we are up first. Gwen, don't freak out, but I'm going to go get some water behind you. So I'm just not walking away.
Okay. Thank you for the reassurance. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for providing me some time to go over the Canadian National Report. And as most folks would agree, happy we're doing it after lunch. Today, we have 30 minutes for this presentation. So I will be presenting the commercial and the recreational portions of Canada's report. And my colleague Trevor Ruel is here. He is the Groundfish Enforcement Coordinator. He will be presenting the enforcement report after my section. Unfortunately, I do need to pass along some regrets. Our provincial counterparts, Mike Turner and Kevin Romanen, were not able to join us in person. They are online, however. So while I won't be speaking to their report, they are available to answer questions if folks have any questions about them. So I'll hop right into it. So overall, following the annual meeting last year in Anchorage, the Canadian portion of the coastwide TCEY for 2024 was 6.47 million net pounds. So after accounting for other removals, and this includes FSC or food social ceremonial catch, non-directed bycatch, and directed commercial and recreational discard mortality, the resulting Canadian FCEY was 5.565 million net pounds. So the Canadian FCEY, or the directed commercial and recreational access, is divided and allocated between the directed sectors at 85% to the commercial sector and 15% to the recreational sector. So first, I will discuss the commercial fishery, and then I will discuss the recreational fishery. So with 85% of the Canadian FCEY, and after accounting for domestic research amounts, also known as use of fish, and commercial discards, a 2024 commercial THC of 4,668,750 net pounds was established. And note that the commercial discard amount of 180,000 net pounds and the amount set aside for use of fish of 60,000 pounds had been deducted prior to the establishment of this TAC. So to follow that available quota of 4.67 million net pounds, commercial catch was at 4,386,271 net pounds, or about 4.386 million net pounds. So this equates to approximately a 93% exploitation rate of the total available quota in 2024. And so a reminder that this catch includes both landed catch and mortality associated with all legal sized released fish in the commercial groundfish hook and line fisheries here in BC. We'd also like just to remind folks that management measures for all of our groundfish commercial fisheries include 100% at-sea electronic monitoring via EM and 100% dockside monitoring of landed catch. All groundfish trips are audited by comparing the logbook records to the EM video footage, EM sensor data, and dockside monitoring data. All of these groundfish fisheries also have individual transferable quota by species and groundfish management areas. So some notable factors that were affecting the commercial halibut fishery this year. As was noted in Dr. Hutnazak's presentation yesterday, a major update in the BC groundfish fisheries was the implementation of a halibut length sampling program in the Option A trawl fleet, and this is done using the EM technology that has been established over the last couple of years. This was developed in collaboration with industry representatives and Archipelago Marine Research, one of our third-party service providers, also known as AMR. A pilot of this program was run from fall 2023 to May 2024 on a select number of wet boats and RTVs, and this was to test the sampling design and the methodology. Once a pilot had run its course, it was then implemented fleet-wide on May 15th, 2024. And vessel crew in this program are responsible for placing the halibut on a specialized measuring board in view of one of the vessel's EM cameras. And this is so that the AMR EM video reviewer is able to estimate the halibut length and the associated weight according to the IPHC length weight conversion table. So information collected from this program will be used to meet our international commitments to support the IPHC stock assessment process. And actually well-timed, I got an email yesterday that we have a set ready to go to Dr. Stewart. So the next thing affecting Canada's halibut fishery is engagement regarding reforms in the license and management of Canada's West Coast commercial fishing industry. So these engagement efforts began in July 2024, and this program is termed the West Coast Commercial Fisheries Modernization. program, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but we love our acronyms. This initiative aims to engage with a broad spectrum of people involved in commercial fisheries. So the Standing Committee of Fisheries and Oceans, SCOFO or FOPO, held hearings in both 2019 and 2023 on West Coast fisheries licensing, foreign ownership, and corporate concentration. DFO has been undertaking broad engagement with First Nations, Indigenous groups, and industry representatives on 5 overarching topics: inclusive representation on fishery advisory boards, transparency of license and quota holdings, strengthened and more transparent socioeconomic data, foreign ownership and concentration of access, and modernizing licensing and management rules to better support economic stability. So this engagement is still ongoing, and it's starting to ramp up with workshops taking place throughout the province beginning next week. Next up, this is not a new factor, but continues to affect the halibut fishery, is there has been yet another rollover of the seasonal expansion to the existing 800 line pilot bottom trawl closure. This was first implemented in 2020, and it's an interim management measure that's intended to limit the harvest of spawning aggregations of arrowtooth flounder and halibut. There is also a year-round closure that was implemented in March 2019, and that continues to be in effect. And as per usual, this expanded closure will be reevaluated throughout the next fishing season. Lastly, while not directly tied to the Canadian commercial halibut fishery, DFO has begun work to enable the continued access of the FIS survey sites that are within the Guayhanas National Park Reserve and Haida Heritage Site. You may recall that when Guayhanas was established, permission was granted by the Archipelago Management Board to allow FIS vessels to sample sites that are contained within the reserve boundaries. And this was a multi-year permission for 3 years. And this concluded after this past season. So I've already begun discussions with folks on the Archipelago Management Board to renew the process and application for the continued access to these sites. An application will be submitted in the near future, and we aren't expecting any issues to arise with this, and we'll keep folks posted. So now I will pivot quickly to the recreational sector in Canada. So just a reminder, the recreational fishery has 15% of the Canadian FCUY, and after the recreational discard amount of 30,000 net pounds had been deducted prior to the establishment of the TAC, the 2024 TAC was 836,250 net pounds. However, there was an overage of just over 30,000 net pounds that was incurred in the 2023 season prior to its early closure on September 30th. The Canadian recreational halibut sector does have an overage provision in place, which indicates that in addition to an early closure of the fishery, if the recreational catch exceeds the TAC for a given season, that catch exceeding the TAC would then be deducted from the following year's TAC. As such, the overage that was incurred in 2023 was deducted from the 2024 TAC prior to the fishery season's opening. So this all resulted in a fishable recreational TAC of just over 800,000 net pounds at 805,000 net pounds, 805,679 net pounds. So the 2024 recreational fishery opened on February 3rd, 2024, with a daily limit of 1 fish per day. Just as a reminder, our recreational license season runs from April 1st to March 31st. So the 2024 season opened with a rollover of the 2023 management measures in place. Then on April 1st, the license season began, and the measures for 2024 were updated to be able to retain 1 fish per day with a maximum length of 126 centimeters. In August, the daily limit was increased to 2 fish per day if both of these fish were 85 centimeters or less. This limit was then reduced back to 1 per day on September 20th, 24. And as the season progressed, catch estimates for the summer months showed higher than forecasted catch. So catch information indicated that the recreational share of the TAC for halibut was going to be achieved by mid-fall 2024. And as such, the committee voted to close the recreational halibut under the BC Tidal Water Sport Fishing License at 11:59 p.m. on October 9th, 2024. And this decision was made based on the expert advice of the Sport Fish Advisory Board and the Recreational Halibut Committee after meeting monthly throughout the season to review catch estimates and trends. So the total estimated catch as of December 20th for the recreational sector is 834,358 net pounds. This is an estimated overage of 3.56%. And note that this is still considered to be an in-season estimate at this point in time, as a corrected estimate won't be available for another month or so. In the report itself, there are a couple of tables that detail the recreational catch by PFMA, or Pacific Fisheries Management Area, along the BC coast. Don't need to go through them line by line, but some overall trends in breaking them out by month and then comparing them for previous years. The majority of catch came from areas or PFMAs on Haida Gwaii and on the North Coast. And likely unsurprisingly, the busiest months were September, followed by August, followed by July. So if the final catch estimate for the 2024 season does result in an overage of the recreational TAC, which seems likely, then the overage provision would likely be applied again, where that overage incurred in 2024 would be counted against the recreational 2025 TAC. So I will move us right along to the 2024 Experimental Recreational Halibut Fishery, or the XRQ program. This opened on April 1st and closed on December 31st. Approximately 256 XRQ licenses were issued, and just over some 7,600 net pounds of uncaught quota was carried forward from the previous season. As of January 28th, 2025, so this morning, estimated catch from the XRQ program was at 19,951 net pounds. Now, this number is different than what I had provided in the report, as the license holders of this program do have until the end of January to return their materials to DFO. And while most users are compliant with this program and do submit their catch records in season, we do review all of the logbooks as they are returned and report any catch that was missed by the license holder. In addition to this delay, Canada Post was on strike for the majority of December, which resulted in a delay in our team receiving and processing logbooks, and we are very busy with them now. Just a quick reminder that the XRQ fishery was developed to test a quota transfer mechanism from the commercial fishery into the recreational sector. Harvesters in this program acquire commercial halibut quota to catch recreationally. The catch from this program is not counted against the recreational mortality limits. Lastly, I will touch on activities in the 2024 Indigenous fisheries. So the estimated food, social, and ceremonial halibut catch in Area 2B is 405,000 net pounds. Since 2009, conditions have been applied to commercial halibut licenses and many communal halibut permits to improve catch reporting of FSC caught fish on commercial trips. And this is called dual fishing. Dual fishing requires a vessel with a valid commercial groundfish license and a complete dual fishing designation certificate issued by the First Nation, indicating the species and amount to be retained by the vessel of that given First Nation. So of total FSC halibut caught in 2024, approximately 29,500 net pounds were caught on dual fishing trips. These trips are subject to all commercial monitoring requirements, including 100% at-sea and dockside monitoring. And in order to advance reconciliation efforts, consultations with Indigenous peoples, and the implementation of reconciliation framework agreements, treaties, and rights-based fisheries as they pertain to groundfish have occurred throughout 2024 and will be going on throughout the 2025-26 fishing season. So I think that's enough of me at this point. I'd like to pass it over to Trevor, who will be giving his enforcement report.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I'll be providing a brief overview of the compliance and enforcement priorities for the 2024 groundfish and commercial halibut fisheries, as well as a summary of enforcement activities and statistics from 2024 fishing season. Enforcement priorities for 2024. We'll look at the key compliance and enforcement priorities for 2024. These priorities are largely unchanged from 2023 and are outlined in the Groundfish Integrated Fisheries Management Plan. These are in no particular order. Closed areas, enforcement focused on fishing in protected areas such as rockfish conservation areas and marine protected areas. Licensing and unauthorized fishing. There's a strong emphasis on preventing groundfish from being caught, retained, and sold without the proper license. Monitoring, compliance, ensuring that vessels comply with 100% at sea and dockside monitoring, including all accurate fishing logs and offloading procedures, remain critical. Along with that, is Gwen touched on, was the audit process as well, to audit the accuracy of the logbooks. Seabird avoidance gear and rockfish releases. Proper seabird gear must be deployed, and the release of rockfish is prohibited. So some of this next part is going to be a little bit of maybe some overlap from Gwen, but the 2024 halibut fishery overview for both commercial and recreational users. Commercial halibut, the season opened March 15th to the 7th with 136 vessels registered and 492 fishing trips. This is a slight decrease from 2023, where there were 139 vessels and 535 trips. This is likely due to the 11-day shorter fishing season and a reduction in the TAC. The recreational halibut season started, like Gwen said, February 3rd, with the daily limits of 1 halibut per day and a specific size restriction. In August, the daily limit increased to 2 halibut under 85 centimeters and then returned to 1 back in September. Overall, the main change from 2023 is the reduction in the upper size limit and the slight shift in the daily catch limits. The experimental recreational halibut program. As Gwen said, this program allows recreational fishers to buy commercial quota, extending their fishing season until December 31st. In 2024, there were 256 licenses issued compared to 225 in 2023, with fewer participants failing to meet the minimum quota requirements. Enforcement activities. In terms of enforcement, 2 main initiatives have been actively working to ensure compliance. First, the Marine Patrol Program. Last year, the Marine Patrol Program conducted 26 2-week patrols with 4 dedicated to groundfish. Some common violations included undersized halibut, lack of seabird avoidance gear, and failing to mark FSC caught fish in the logbook. During those patrols, during the 4 dedicated groundfish patrols, the officers checked 12 commercial halibut vessels and 5 commercial communal halibut vessels. The aerial surveillance program, which is called PHASE. The PHASE program carried out 108 flights in 2024, encountering 209 commercial halibut vessels. While the number of vessels encountered dropped from 2023, the patrols were consistent with previous year's trends. Third-party service provider, AMR, Archipelago Marine Research Limited, continues to provide observer and monitoring services for the commercial halibut fishery and groundfish fisheries. In 2024, AMR recorded a notable increase in halibut-related occurrences, up 49% from the previous year, especially regarding rockfish releases and undersized halibut. Some key occurrence reports trends for 2024. Undersized halibut violations saw a significant increase, up 172%. Now it sounds extreme. Last year there was 4 occurrence reports for undersized halibut. This year there were 17. The release of rockfish violations was increased by 44%. And prohibited species violations and closed area fishing saw a decrease. To wrap up the 2024 enforcement priorities for groundfish fisheries, we remain focused on protecting closed areas, ensuring proper licensing, and monitoring compliance. Enforcement efforts such as those of the Marine Patrol Program and Aerial Surveillance Program are essential for maintaining fishery health and compliance with the regulations. Also, dockside monitoring and electronic monitoring plays a big role as well. Thank you, and happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Thank you both. Do we have questions? Oh, Richard, go ahead.
These questions are just for my better understanding of Canadians' system management. I know in past meetings you stated that your logbook and your electronic monitoring compliance is not 100% of the EM is not correlated to your logbooks, right? There's a percentage of the logbooks to EM, not compliance, but monitoring. What's the percentage of that? And does that vary every year? Or is there a goal that you try to achieve as far as the amount of monitoring of correlation between the logbooks and the EM?
So every vessel, every hook and line vessel is monitored. 10% of their trips is reviewed and audited compared to the logbook. So if they made 10 sets, then 1 set would be reviewed, and they would go through and monitor every minute of that set to make sure that the logbook was accurate with the details that were reported. That's for the hook and line fleet.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for refreshing my memory on that.
Okay.
Another question I have is this recreational experimental fishery. How is the quota bought from a commercial fisherman, and how is it applied to their better access to the fishery?
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Yamada. So it is a market-based transfer mechanism, and all users of this XRQ program are provided with some materials where they can approach a commercial license holder, commercial groundfish license holder that has halibut quota. They can also approach quota brokers as well. They can also obtain quota from another user of this program. Now, the information that we provide is limited to what we are able to provide via the Privacy Act, but the majority of users go through a quota broker who will provide that to them. So the transfer of money is between the quota broker or whoever is willing to transfer the temporary quota and the license holder, and forms get filled out and submitted to us at the Groundfish Management Unit, and we have 2 dedicated quota officers that facilitate the movement of quota. So once that form is filled out and both sides have agreed to it, the transfer of that quota will take place via the databases and the quota officers.
So the recreational buyer is given pounds of fish, not numbers of fish, or?
Correct. Yeah,
So
because it is commercial quota, it is in pounds.
So they have to, do they log how do they log their usage of that quota? Say they buy 1,000 pounds and and how do they log that?
So the minimum that a user must have on their license, as Trevor had mentioned, is 20 pounds. They are not allowed to go out fishing under the authority of this program unless they have at least 20 pounds on their license. If they go out, they have 20 pounds on their license, they catch a 100-pound fish, they are allowed to keep that, but they must reconcile that overage and bring their minimum back up to 20 pounds before their next trip. So they are required to record all quota caught halibut, which is what we call them internally, in their logbooks that the department does provide to them. And then it is entered into a database system that will deduct that amount of quota that applies to that fish from whatever they have available on their license.
And what are the reporting requirements? How soon do they have to report this from the time they use it?
They have to enter in their information as soon as the halibut's on board and it's safe to measure them. And they have to report it within 7 days of the completion of their trip.
Thank you very much. This has been very informative.
Thank you.
If I could just add a couple things. They are also, XRQ fishermen are also, have license conditions as well, like the commercial sector. So there's lots of additional reporting requirements, license condition requirements as well. And then the other thing maybe that Gwen didn't touch on is the price that the fishermen pay for the halibut is it's market price at the time or the day that they purchase it. So it's just like the market during the year, it goes up and down. But when they do purchase it, say for $6 a pound, and they don't use that quota and they want to, get their money back for their quota, they can't sell it at a higher value. It's sold at the value that they bought it at minus some commission fees and stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Any further questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On to United States, please.
Sure. I don't know.
There we go. Okay. You can hear me okay. All right. Well, thanks. It's good to be here again. For the record, I am Kurt Iverson. I'm a fisheries management specialist in the regional office in Alaska, Juneau, Alaska. And I'm here to help present the U.S. Contracting Party Report because I'm joined with colleagues. Frank here is from representing the management of the fisheries in Area 2A, and I'll be joined with colleagues from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And also we have, regrettably, Lieutenant Commander Jed Rasky from the U.S. Coast Guard cannot attend. We do have sections in here that document the enforcement efforts of both the U.S. Coast Guard and the Office of Law Enforcement. Commander Rasky couldn't make it to this particular meeting. I'll run through that section very briefly. We're happy to take questions if you have them for him, and we can make sure that you get answers. Along with the Coast Guard, we have the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement, and there's also a section here, and we have Assistant Director with us today, and Ben Cheeseman, and he's available for questions as well. But the same thing, I'll walk through that particular section fairly briefly. It's pretty self-descriptive. It's a short, and but if you have any questions, please feel free to chime in. So with that, I'll turn it over to Frank. And
sorry, I took the mic away.
No.
Just a little too early there. My name is Frank Lockhart. I work with the National Marine Fisheries Service Sustainable Fisheries Division out of the Seattle office. And so I will be giving the overview of the Area 2A report. I will not be kind of reading from the document itself, but I will be going in order of the sections as they are in that document if you want to follow along. Also, I'll be referencing some numbers. Those numbers are as of mid-December. Some of them have changed. Unfortunately, I don't have those numbers on me right now. And then finally, if there are questions, the states of Oregon and Washington have staff here. Lynn Mattis from the state of Oregon is out there, as well as Heather Hall. If the questions are too specific, I might have to call on them. So summary of the report for Area 2A, the 2024 FCEY was 1,470,000 pounds, and it was divided into the sectors that are listed in the Pacific Fishery Management Council's catch sharing plan. The overall harvest was 1,302,308 pounds, and that's about 88.6% of the overall allocation. The tribal allocation was 514,500 pounds, and the harvest was 485,500 pounds, or roughly 94.4%. The non-tribal commercial overall allocation was 343,339 pounds, and the harvest was 302,000 pounds, a little over that, roughly 88% allocation there. And then finally, for the recreational fishery, the overall allocation was a little over 612,000 pounds, and the harvest was 514,600 pounds, roughly 84.1% of that. So as far as the individual fisheries, just to give you some sense of what they are. So for the tribal fishery, those numbers are separated between a ceremonial and subsistence fishery, and then a commercial fishery. For the non-tribal commercial fishery, we have two or three components, depending on how you look at it. The first is the directed long line, and this is a fishery that's south of Point Chehalis, Washington. And just to note, Basha referenced this. This is the second year of NIMS taking over the management of this fishery, and overall, that transition has gone well. We are still somewhat jealous of IPHC's ability to make regulatory changes at the very, very quickly. It still takes us roughly 3 weeks to kind of institute changes there. So, but that has worked well. This past year, we had 5 openings ranging of, these were each 58-hour openings from late June to the end of September. So the other components of the commercial fishery and the non-tribal fishery are incidental catch in salmon and incidental catch in the sablefish fisheries there. Moving on to the recreational component, the fisheries are, the allocation for recreational fisheries are broken out by state. The state of Washington has 35.6% of that allocation. State of Oregon, 29. This is of the overall non-tribal allocation. And then Oregon has 29.7% of that. And then California has 4%. So Washington had a successful fishery this year, and they actually went over their allocation by 0.8%. Oregon also had a reasonably successful fishery, obtaining about 71% of their allocation, and California was less than that at just a little bit over 53% of their allocation. So Kurt mentioned the enforcement, and we were also not able to have an enforcement person make the meeting, but the report is relatively straightforward and is split out by commercial and recreational. So if you have any specific questions on that, we can pass those on to the appropriate people and get those answers back to you as quickly as possible. So with that, I will conclude my report. And if you have any questions, I can either answer them now or at the end of the entire presentation as you wish.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Just one quick question. You mentioned there was 5 non-tribal directed fishery openings. Is that pretty consistent year over year, or are people able to catch them faster some years?
Since we're only in year 2, it's kind of hard to draw a pattern from there. But if you allow me to go back when it was, I think that's actually on the higher end. It seems to me that it was generally 3 and 4 openers that was possible, and sometimes I think it was even a couple of openers. So I think fairly close, but maybe a little bit higher than what has happened in the past.
Okay, thanks. I guess one other quick question, just for my curiosity. It's my understanding your sablefish quota has got a really nice allocation boost, and just wondering if there's any anticipation of more incidental halibut because of that.
You are that is no longer my fishery, and so I don't know if maybe I can turn. It looks like Heather may be coming up to potential, or Heather and Lynn may be coming up to that. It looks like Heather, those Heather Hall from and Lynn from state of Washington and Oregon, respectively.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I'll give it a shot. The way that the halibut quota is set within the incidental sablefish is through a ratio. So there's only a certain amount of halibut that can be caught. And it's also limited by a total number of halibut per trip that can be retained. So it could go up, but I almost think that sablefish is limiting in the last couple of years with the really high quota. So we didn't necessarily see an increase in halibut retention.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all. And over to you, Kurt.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I will, for the next section, I'm going to into the report on pages 12 and 13 primarily. And that is highlighting the directed fishery in Alaska. And we've talked about this before, but I'm going to remind you, just going through some of the highlights of the directed fishery. As you know, it's governed by an individual fishing quota program, and the quota is divided into vessel categories, which you see in table 6. Those categories are separated by vessel lengths as well as a catcher processor category. And so you'll see all of those categories in all of their respective areas. The quotas, the management of the program directs that the quotas assigned to those specific vessel categories must be caught by those vessels. Now, there are some provisions that allow what we call a fish up or a fish down process. It's limited in nature, but it is possible that a certain amount of quota can be taken outside of the vessel category. And so when you're looking at this table, the totals of the vessel counts represent the unique number of vessels that made landings in that particular area for 2024. The totals of the vessels, or the vessel counts above that, do not necessarily sum to that sum total. The sum total is unique vessels, and then the others represent the amount of the vessels fishing that particular type of quota, making that respective landing. So just be aware of that. I think one of the more striking things that you'll see in this table is the vast differences between Area 2C and 3A and the other areas, in particular out to the west. Much greater number of vessels in those two eastern areas. And that's where most of the quota is too, as you well know. So Another thing that we have in this table that I want to highlight is the Community Development Quota Program. And that was established back in the early 1990s and was for the purpose of developing the economy in Western Alaska. So halibut was one of the species that was allocated to the Community Development Quota programs. They also receive other forms of groundfish. It started with pollock. Several other species that they've been allocated as well. So those harvests by the Community Development Quota groups is also shown there. And as I move through this, I'm going to hit some of the highlights. And I think one of the people who commented earlier mentioned the low amount of harvests in the western areas. And I think Commissioner DeGrief mentioned that yesterday. I had a question about it. And you'll see that in this table 6 as well. If you're looking in particular at Area 4B, you see an allocation of 872,000 pounds, but only 273,000 some pounds was actually harvested. And down into the CDQ groups, that's another something of note, I think. They were allocated a total of 1.174 million pounds, but they only harvested 351,000 pounds last year. And that came from areas 4B through 4E. So I think Commissioner DeGrief asked that question, what was going on? How did this happen? And it really is a combination of factors. And I think what we saw in the western portion of Alaska carries in the other areas as well. It's just more, the problems out there are more acute. The first thing is it's very expensive to fish out there. It's a long way out. The next thing is the processing facilities are very limited there too, which adds to the expense. It's more running time. And a third thing, which you've been hearing a lot about, is the catch rates have been low. So those sorts of things are all coming together to just make fishing very difficult out there. They're leaving a lot of fish in the water in those westward areas, as we can see here. If you don't have any other questions, I can move on. I thought maybe as I move through this report, I can stop periodically. I don't know if you have anything you wanted to talk about with this directed fishery.
Commissioner Davis.
This table is very helpful. Thanks, Kurt. The column on vessel count, is that the number of vessels that reported landings or the total number that are allocated IFQ?
That is the total number of vessels that recorded landings. Yes. So go ahead with your question. I can anticipate what you're going to ask.
So the number that are allocated IFQ is a larger number, like there's some leasing and so on of quota that happens?
That is correct. Yes, leasing is prevalent in the IFQ program. And there are several different forms of leases. Medical leases are allowed for quota shareholders. There are leases that are allowed, that are unconstrained leases in the vessel category A, the catcher processor category. There are also leases allowed, you see my notes here, due to military service. There's leases allowed for survivorship beneficiaries of people who have passed away. And then there are also leases allowed for guided angler fish, which is very similar to the experimental fishing program that Gwen was talking about. There's a lot of parallels there. It's basically leasing quota share to the charter halibut sector. So leases are common. The other thing that would reduce the number of vessels fishing, not necessarily the number of people fishing, is the ride-alongs, as we would call them. And I think we've talked about, these are people who own quota shares, but they may not necessarily own a vessel. Or if they do, even if they do, they combine their quota with someone else's quota on one vessel. So I have D-class shares, my friend has D-class shares. Instead of us fishing independently we combine on one vessel. So that shrinks the number of vessels fishing, doesn't necessarily shrink the amount of quota that gets used. And that is very common.
And the ride along piece is that the holder of that quota who is not fishing on his or her own vessel, but is pooled with someone else, needs to be on board with the person who's actively fishing.
That's very true. The IFQ program, with some exceptions, especially in the A category, is an owner on board restriction. So if you own quota and that quota is going to be used, with the exception of some of those leases I was just talking about, if that quota is going to be used, you have to be on board the quota.
For all the classes except catcher processors.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was reflecting on that, and I'll have questions later, but not
Yeah, okay.
not
Sure.
for here, more
Sure.
just to chew on for other things domestically.
Sure. Yeah.
Commissioner DeGreef, sorry.
Maybe I'll handle a couple of those. As you heard from our last report, Canada's looking at licensing policy, and part of the modernization discussion is owner-operator. And so I was just curious, what challenges, like we're moving forward to this, what kind of challenges have you've had this provision in? I don't know what you call it. On our East Coast, we call it owner-operator, but you've had this provision for since inception, is my understanding. And so just wondering the challenges you've found with those, so maybe we can avoid those. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's a big topic, Commissioner DeGreef, and it's great. So I'll try to generalize some of the
Sure.
problems, and then happy to go into any level of detail you or anyone else wants to offline. I think one of the problems that people perceive, and Carla Bush may want to join in here if you want. She's very familiar with this from the state's perspective. I think with the owner on board, and that combination of people fishing, and some of those people are not completely tied to the fishery anymore. There is, with valuable quota, there is an incentive to hang on to that quota. And you may not live in Alaska anymore. You may not live in the community where that quota came from, the fishing history that derived that quota came from, but the quota is still being used. So in a certain sense, that it is working at cross purposes to the owner on board, the original intentions of the owner on board. The owner on board was there to limit consolidation, and also with the idea to keep a lot of that quota where the fishing history was derived from, small communities in particular. But people found it advantageous to carry that quota with them, and they're not tied to the fishery anymore. They live outside of the state even, and come back only to fish that quota, only to ride along on someone else's boat to fish that quota and then leave. So that's a social aspect that has been challenging. So I don't know. Yeah. Okay. I think of all of the challenges out there, that's probably the highlight and the thing that is, it's tough to fix. Very, very tough to fix.
Neil, did you want to ask a follow-up there?
This one will be brief. Kurt, is this all sort of laid out in terms of the policy and how it's implemented, or its operational guidelines in a place that we could access?
Yes. And unfortunately, all of our catch shares programs receive periodic reviews. And we just now, in December, introduced the draft program review for the halibut and sablefish IFQ program. It's all laid out there. All of the features of the program, and then some of the challenges that have gone with these sorts of things. So I'd be happy to get you a copy of that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Robert?
If I could add, Mr. Chairman, Peter, one of the reasons for the owner on board requirement, particularly as the program matured and more were what they call second generation quota shareholders have to be on the boat. The first generation were grandfathered where they don't have to be. So it's evolved to about 70% second generation. And one of the reasons for that is there was a fear at the beginning that Albertsons or some large processor would start competing with the fishermen. And the intent was to have fishermen compete against fishermen for the quota. So if there's a high probability that a CEO from a large fish corporation is not going to buy this and then find himself having to go on board, if you follow that. So it's a disincentive, and it's intended to be a fisherman's quota program.
Yeah, thank you very much for both those comments. That's very helpful for my thought process going forward. Just one quick follow-up in terms of how is that audited or enforced, or like, is it a dockside thing where the people sign off that when they have a ride along? How is that kind of thing enforced? And
Well, the principal enforcement mechanism is that these are individual quotas. And so when they're on the boat, even though they're side by side on that boat, the quota in terms of accounting for its fishing is kept separate. So they're coming in to land their fish, and it may be a combination, but there has to be an accounting there at some point when the fish come off the boat. Carla's gets put on her quota, mine get put on my quota. You can't exceed, somebody's paying for that quota at the landing, at the point of landing.
okay, I was actually more thinking about ensuring that the ride along is actually on the boat and not, arriving at the dock or something like that.
Right.
Just
That-
curious.
Yeah, that comes at the accounting when the landing is made. Yeah, the person holding the quota is signing off on that record.
Yeah, thank you very
Yeah.
much for that. It's very insightful.
If there's no other questions, I would go into the recreational fisheries overview, and I'd be joined by our friends from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. That's Adam St. Savior and Phil Joy. So I'll pass the microphone to them.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Adam St. Savior, statewide ground fish coordinator for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Sport Fish Division. I will summarize the Alaska recreational fishery portion of the U.S. National Report. This fall, we put together final 2023 halibut removal estimates and preliminary 2024 removal estimates by the sport fleet in Alaska for guided and unguided sectors. Data used to produce these estimates included charter logbook harvests, statewide harvest survey, and mean weights by sub-area. We have a dockside sampling program in Southeast Alaska that collects biological compositions from 8 ports, primarily representing Area 2C. The dockside sampling program in South Central collects biological compositions from 6 ports representing Area 3A. Mean weights by sub-area were calculated from port sampling data. If you'd like to refer to Table 7 in the report, in 2023, final Area 2C charter removals were estimated to be 0.832 million pounds, approximately 4% over the allocation. Area 3A removals were estimated to be 1.588 million pounds, approximately 16% under the allocation. Unguided removal estimates in Area 2C were 1.277 million pounds. Unguided removals in Area 3A were 0.922 million pounds. Sport removals in Areas 3B and 4 are quite low in relative terms, but are included as part of our catch accounting. Details on numbers of fish, mean weights, and yield for all areas can be found in Table 7 of the USA Contracting Party Report. In 2024, the Area 2C charter fishery allocation was 0.81 million pounds. Regulations included a one fish daily bag limit and reverse slot limit of halibut less than or equal to 40 inches and greater than or equal to 80 inches through July 14th. After July 15th, the slot limit was reduced to less than or equal to 36 inches and greater than or equal to 80 inches. And Fridays were closed July 19th through September 13th. The 3A charter allocation in 2024 was 1.89 million pounds. Regulations included a two fish bag limit with a maximum size on one of the fish of 28 inches, a limit of one trip per charter vessel per day and per charter halibut permit per day, and a closure of halibut retention on all Wednesdays. Charter and unguided fishery regulations in the remainder of the state included a bag limit of two fish of any size. The regulations are customized to each area due to the size of the allocation and the predominant business models. While there is a similar amount of effort among the two areas, the allocation in 2C has been less than half that in 3A. Furthermore, the predominant business model in Area 2C is a multi-day remote lodge stay, where in 3A it's primarily day trips. I'd like to refer to Table 8. In 2024, the preliminary estimates for charter halibut removals in Area 2C was 0.843 million pounds, 4% over the allocation. The preliminary estimates of charter removals in Area 3A was 1.607 million pounds, approximately 15% under the allocation. Unguided removals in Area 2C were 1.01 million pounds. Unguided removals in Area 3A were 0.878 million pounds, and again, that was 2024. Sport removal estimates from areas 3B and 4, as well as details on numbers of fish, mean weights, and yield for all areas can be found in Table 8 of the USA Contracting Party Report. In addition to estimating sport halibut removals in Alaska, the department is also responsible for analyzing alternative management measures for the charter halibut fisheries in Area 2C and 3A as part of the catch sharing plan. Analyses were requested by the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council Charter Halibut Management Committee in October. Results were presented at the council meeting in December. Projected removals in 2025 under status quo regulations are 0.862 million pounds in Area 2C and 1.764 million pounds in Area 3A. Under the suite of management measures recommended by the council at the December 2024 meeting, removal projections range from 0.608 to 1.013 million pounds for Area 2C and from 1.425 to 2.079 million pounds for Area 3A. These recommended management measures can be found in IPHC Regulation Proposal B1. That concludes my section of the Alaska Recreational Fishery Report. We have a little bit more to add for my colleague, Dr. Phil Joy, but I can answer any questions before I leave the table.
Any questions, colleagues? Dr. Davis, I've elevated you.
You probably put a Band-Aid on a finger, but that's about it. So just on the monitoring side, I noticed there's a few updates. Am I getting ahead of you, or is that appropriate to ask about now?
Possibly. You could ask the question. I can let you know.
Okay. I noticed you're doing some. Actually, ADF&G has begun collecting additional biological data, at least in 2C. And then it says age and sex data continue to be collected in 3A. I guess my question was, has there been any thought given to using the presence of staff at the dock to also verify compliance with catch limits and other measures, and the potential to collect catch information that might contribute to an independently kind of verified estimate of catch? So two questions in there.
Yeah, Commissioner Davis, through the chair. So our port simplers are instructed to contact law enforcement when they observe violations. And that's, they have their cell phone numbers, and that's, it happens for sure. And then the second part of your question, as far as like verifying, sorry, could you repeat the second part, please?
Yes, it's just about whether there's an opportunity to use the fact that you've got these staff at docks doing the sampling to potentially also be collecting information that might contribute towards the estimate of like a catch, a total catch for that sector. Because as I understand it, if I remember right from previous sort of agency reports, right now you're relying on end of year sort of like surveys, mail out surveys. So perhaps that's changed. But so yeah, I was interested in sort of the potential for that being, sort of time lagged, Fisher dependent versus more timely Fisher independent estimates of catch, and whether there's any sort of thinking in that direction.
Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, so for the charter sector, we have electronic logbooks in Southeast Alaska, and it'll be statewide in 2025. So that is real-time accounting on that sector. And for the private sector, we have the statewide harvest survey, which my colleague will go into detail on, and so he can probably answer the specific parts of that question. But that is how we obtain the estimates of removals by that sector. The port sampling program, they obtain like species compositions and weights, and those get applied to like our estimating our removals for our other species. But yeah, that's not our means of determining the number of removals by that sector.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Phil Joy with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Sport Fish Division. I'm a fisheries scientist, and I work with Adam quite a bit on the groundfish stuff. So I'm just here to comment briefly on the statewide harvest survey and address some of these questions that like Commissioner Davis just raised. So the department has a mail-out survey that we send out at the end of the year to a random selection of license holders, and this is how we generate estimates of unguided harvests for all fish statewide, across, including halibut. And we are in the process of modernizing this survey right now. We've been working with the Marine Recreational Information Program, MRIP. I know that came up last year with that, and we've been working with a survey expert to update our entire survey design, with the main goal of going from this written mail-out format to an online electronic format. And part of that is an improved survey design that's going to generate, hopefully deal with some of the recall bias, prestige bias that we deal with in the current survey, as well as getting more timely estimates like you alluded to earlier. Right now, we are sending out the surveys now. We will not have complete estimates done until the beginning of October. So there's a huge time lag there that we are trying to cut down on, that we think the electronic format will get at. And then other things to deal with that is greater efficiency and really speed and more accurate estimates. We've got a couple of different survey designs on the ready to go right now, and we've also we've sent out the bids for a contractor to actually put the online survey together for us. And the big hurdle that we're getting through right at the moment has to do with the fact that the state currently only requires a mailing address when you're buying a fishing and hunting license in the state. And obviously, to do this electronic format, we need to collect cell phone numbers and email addresses. And so we are working with licenses and the Department of Law to enact that. And we have full support from the ADF&G commissioner to enact this. So we're optimistic that by next year we will be putting out this new electronic survey. And secondly, we plan to run the two surveys, the mail out and the electronic survey, side by side for a couple of years to determine how our estimates change as we move to this new format. So that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of it. So I'm happy to answer more questions. I know I can circle back to that one question about using our port sampling program. to help verify our estimates of harvests. And I think that would be really difficult to do right now because they're not sampling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're there to get samples and meet sampling requirements for our biological and compositional data. So it would be a stretch to try and get actual harvest estimates. They do collect that data, but in terms of actually getting an estimate of a statewide harvest survey, validating that, I think that would be really difficult at this stage. And we're really focused on improving that survey at this moment.
Thank you for that. Any questions on this? I think we're good.
I got off easy.
Thank you much.
I'll take the microphone back for just a moment here and mention the guided anglerfish program. That's there's a table on that in page 17, table 9, and it outlines the last few years of the GAF program. We call it, have our acronym for guided anglerfish. I'll just very briefly point out a highlight of this table is the stark difference in the use of GAF in area 2C versus 3A. And it has always been that way. GAF is very important in area 2C, and it's growing every year. In 2024, there was nearly 148,000 pounds of quota that got transferred into the charter halibut sector for the use of additional harvest opportunities. So that added a full 18% on top of the 810,000 pound allocation that came to the charter sector in 2024 in area 2C. So if you don't have any questions, I'll flip ahead. Commissioner DeGreef.
Yeah, Kurt, just trying to be quick, but do you understand what it seems like it's an increasingly popular program, and just curious as to why, or not. Your thoughts.
Right. I think that one of the things that drives that in particular in area 2C is the structure of the management measures that we develop for that area versus area 3A. Area 3A receives more quota to the charter halibut sector. Area 2C has less quota. It also has growing effort there. There's a lot of tourism in area 2C. So that those two things come together to provide some really quite restrictive management measures. Day of the week closures, slot limits, 1 fish a day. That fish is size limited. And I think that is an important driver here, because with GAF, you can take a big fish. You can take and I think that is probably what's driving it in that area. And then Adam was mentioning the stark differences in the business models as well. In area 2C, there are a lot of fishing lodges. In area 3A, much fewer. And the lodge clientele, they come and they stay for several days. They're a different type of clientele, and they have different expectations come with that. So I think all of that sort of feeds into it, but it plays itself out here in this table.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, look what's next. This is the non-directed halibut takings in 2024. So skipping ahead, going to table 10. This lays out not only what we saw in what we call halibut prohibited species catch, because that is what it is. If it's taken outside of the directed fishery or the recreational fisheries, it cannot be kept. So it shows the 2024 harvest by area and by breakout of gear type in that fourth column, the 2024 actual. It also shows the 2023 totals in those first columns. So you compare last year, 2023's totals of 2,215 metric tons, with this year's 2024 total of 2,291 metric tons. That's an increase of 168,000 pounds over last year. We also have some columns in there that show what we projected in the way of bycatch and what actually occurred. That's thrown in there because it does affect what we saw in the way of how our harvest, we expected our harvest to be back in the interim meeting versus where they are right now. So it shows some differences. Basically, we're projecting back in early October what we might end up with. Again, I'll go through this table and just hit a couple of highlights, and then I can take any of your questions. I think it was Commissioner DeGree pointed out the increase in halibut bycatch in the trawl sector in Area 3A, and we talked about that yesterday, and that was, I think Commissioner Curlin answered that correctly. That was driven by bycatch in another species. It was salmon bycatch that forced a shutdown in the pelagic trawl fishery for pollock. Those boats were already crewed up, their front-loaded expenses paid, the processing facilities were full of employees, and the fishery shut down. And there was a lot of pollock left in the water because of these lightning strike events of too much salmon being taken. So a lot of these boats then turned to something they haven't been doing in the last several years, and that is non-pelagic trawling, targeting the deep water flatfish species and especially arrowtooth flounder. The margins are very thin in that fishery, and that's the reason we haven't seen much effort in that particular portion of trawling. But out of desperation, that's what they did. They turned there, and halibut bycatch went up. It went up more than we expected it to do. Classic example of that squeezing the bubble sort of thing. So we did see halibut bycatch dropping in the Bering Sea overall. If you're adding up, you could highlight especially 4C, D, and E, and in the closed area as well. Out there, bycatch tends to be driven by the very voluminous yellowfin solefish target fishery. That's an enormous fishery out there, and consequently, there's a lot of the bycatch comes from that. This year and last year, yellowfin sole prices were poor, and so that had a direct effect on the amount of bycatch that occurred. What also comes into that is the behaviors of the fleet. They are getting better. They're facing pressures from lower bycatch levels, which was a result of the halibut abundance-based management that was implemented. So those sorts of things come into play, and we did see a drop in the western portions of Bering Sea. In Area 4B, we also saw a drop on bycatch. That's a different area. Most of the target fishery for the trawl fleet out there is Atka mackerel, and over time, the Atka mackerel harvests have been good, but basically the fleet out there is getting better at roiding halibut as well. And so we're only seeing 2 years here, 2023 and 2024, but in Area 4B, there is a declining trend in bycatch out there as well. So I will mention just, again, very briefly, 2 particular programs that are going to have an effect on bycatch, and that is the implementation of abundance-based management, which occurred in 2024. There is also the Pacific Cod Trawl Cooperative Program, became effective in 2024 as well. So that is a catch shares program for the Pacific Cod catcher vessel sector in the Bering Sea. So prior to the implementation of that program, that trawl sector fell into the partial observer coverage, and it was capped. It still has a cap on the amount of halibut prohibited species catch cap on crab and other bycatch as well. But with the implementation of that catch shares program, it went to not only 100% observer coverage, but also they're seeing their halibut PSC cap drop by 25%. And that came down, it's coming down incrementally. It dropped 12.5% in 2024. It's going to drop another 12.5% in 2025. So those two programs both came online in 2024, and I think also had some of the effect there, as I was mentioning, in reducing bycatch in the Bering Sea. So the other thing that we will see looking forward in regulatory development, and we've talked about this in the past, is electronic monitoring. Going into 2025, we have in regulation now an electronic monitoring program for the catcher vessels of pollock in the Bering Sea and also the catcher vessels in the Gulf of Alaska. This is pelagic trawling. So prior to 2025, both these sectors were operating under what we call an exempted fishing permit, and that they were essentially experimenting with electronic monitoring. This is a program we have in place for particular regulatory regimes that are going to be very heavy on the implementation phase. The idea is to experiment and do things that aren't nailed down in regulation yet, to make sure that you get it right when the regulations are finally developed. So this particular exempted fishing permit was in place for those two trawl fisheries for, I think, 4 years prior to this year. Going forward into 2025, it is in regulation. So what that program does is it puts electronic monitoring on board the vessels. These are cameras, and they are there primarily for compliance purposes, because the bycatch itself comes on shore. It all gets unloaded there, and that's where the observers are. I think in Canada you do a similar thing. So the observers are shoreside. The cameras are there to ensure compliance, to make sure all that bycatch does come back, doesn't get pitched over the side. Once the bycatch gets to the plant, it's completely enumerated there and biological samples are taken. So again, that is implemented in the Gulf of Alaska pelagic trawl fishery and the catcher vessel pollock fishery in the Bering Sea. So we get not only better accountability that way, it's less expensive as well. Observers, as you know, are real people on the deck of the boat, very expensive. So I know you have questions, so I'll just cut it off there. So.
Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, Kurt, when you have trawl down here, is that inclusive of both pelagic and hard on bottom trawl?
It is. Yes.
Neil?
Thanks, Kurt. That was really helpful overview. So the EM component, the new thing, that's for the pelagic pollock trawl fishery. Have I got that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Is that, I would have thought a pelagic, I assume that was primarily driven by salmon bycatch. I wouldn't have thought there would have been much halibut bycatch in a pelagic.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there similar thinking about these kinds of requirements for the bottom trawl component of the fleet?
Yes, there is. Now that things have worked out with the pelagic trawl fleet, which was easier because it is in general a cleaner fishery. But now that that has worked out, the next step going forward, the expectation is to apply this to the rockfish program, which operates in the central Gulf of Alaska. And that particular program, it's a catch shares program that already exists. It already has 100% observer coverage, but again, putting those cameras on board instead of people and doing the observing on shore is less expensive, and it is more accurate as well. So that's the next step. Now that we've worked out this one, it's fully implemented. We'll be, again, working probably under an exempted fishing permit to move this into the rockfish program as the next step.
And then are there other bottom trawl fleets beyond the rockfish fleet?
Yes, there is.
GI?
There's, yeah. Well, it depends on what we're talking about, but if we're in the Gulf of Alaska, maybe, yeah, Gulf of Alaska, there's essentially, in terms of non-pelagic trawling, we've got the pelagic trawling for pollock. In non-pelagic trawling, we have Pacific cod, and that is probably the biggest non-pelagic trawling effort that we have. And then there are also non-pelagic trawling for those species I just mentioned. Those are arrowtooth flounder and deep water flatfish. So those two exist. And within, I guess we would characterize it as non-pelagic trawling, non-rockfish program trawling. So that's what we're left with. And then within that category, it's divided into catcher processors and catcher vessels. Now those catcher processors that currently perform that non-pelagic trawling, they have 100% observer coverage right now. So that remainder, non-rockfish, non-pelagic, non-catcher processor, that is the one that is subject to partial coverage category right now.
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Keep it up.
Yeah, I know. Keep going. And admittedly, that is the roughest one to deal with because of the variety of bycatch that they get. However, when we get down to that level, that's a relatively small group of vessels. And I looked it up just this morning. They were responsible for 11% of the halibut bycatch last year. It's not that many boats. They were subject to coverage at 45% observer coverage last year. Or wait a minute, 2023. I don't have the 2024 figures in front of me yet. So 45% coverage and 11% of the halibut bycatch. But they catch other things as well. We're focused on halibut. They catch other things that need careful accounting.
Appreciate the updates. Thank you.
Yeah.
And encouraging progress. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions about that particular section? Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, as you probably know, Canada's moved to EM systems as well since COVID. I'm just wondering how you ground truthed the data, or what kind of studies were done to ground truth observer data or observer coverage in the data coming from that versus your EM system data. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Grief. And I don't have an answer for that. That was all part of that exempted fishing permit process. And I don't have the particulars for that, but I'd be happy to get them to you.
That'd be
really,
great, Kurt.
yeah, it's a
That'd
really
be
good
great.
question, and it would compare and contrast with what has happened in British Columbia. So
Okay.
I get it.
Yeah, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
I'd be happy to do that. I'll take any other questions, or we'll just move on to the subsistence section. Should we do that?
I think you can move along.
Okay. And for that, I'm joined with my friend and colleague, Carla Bush from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. This is Alaska Subsistence.
Hello. For the record, my name is Carla Bush with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. I'll just provide a brief overview of the subsistence halibut fishery information. In short, this is the same information that was provided last year. Every other year, our subsistence section updates the subsistence estimates. So the most recent estimates that are provided here are from 2022. And the total harvest was estimated at just over 400,000 pounds. Most of that is taken in Area 2C, about 63% of the total. 30% comes from 3A, and overall represents approximately 1% of the halibut removals in Alaska. The full report has recently been published just last week. I can provide that link to the Secretariat for those interested in reviewing the full report of the 2022 subsistence harvest estimate. In general, there's been a declining trend in both the number of subsistence halibut permits that are annually issued. That trend has continued in 2023 and 2024. Fewer permits every year are issued, and similarly, the total number in pounds of subsistence halibut harvested have declined from year to year. Currently, our subsistence section is beginning their studies to estimate total harvest of subsistence caught in 2024. Those efforts will continue throughout the year and be provided at next year's annual meeting. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I see you. But before, sorry, you indicated that permits are declining. Are there fewer requests? Is that the root cause?
Yeah, I guess, Mr. Chair, yes, you are the chair.
Back through me.
Through you. Yeah, the total number of, there's both rural subsistence halibut permits and ones that are tribally designated. And the number of applications that the National Marine Fisheries Service has received each year has declined. And as to why, we don't know, but that's a very consistent trend since the beginning of the program in 2023. Year over year, there's just been a gradual decline in the number of permits that are requested.
Okay. Neil?
Thank you. Yeah, well, one of my questions was that and why, but it sounds like that's a bit of a mystery. First of all, I sympathize. It can be really challenging to get catch data on this kind of fishery. So these are common challenges. I was just interested in, so you had a response rate of 56%. You don't extrapolate the number you get in terms of reported catch, or do you, or you just assume that those who haven't responded haven't fished? I guess, how do you deal with the 44% you're not hearing from to generate an estimate you think sort of represents this fishery as a whole?
Yeah, thank you for that question through the chair. Commissioner Davis, it's a combination of estimates. There's both a mail out survey that happens, and I think that was your 56% response rate in the number of returned surveys that were sent out. They mail out a survey to everybody in the previous year who had an active permit. They also conduct household surveys. So they go to various communities, and that changes from study to study. So they can, over the course of time, hit all the areas. But so it's a combination of responses from the mail out survey and household surveys in targeted communities. And then I believe it is extrapolated to, they use both of those sources to provide the total estimate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, that brings us to the final sections on enforcement. And I would remind you of the partnership that exists between the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Alaska Wildlife Troopers. It's a very important partnership because the sheer enormity of the territory that has to be patrolled off of Alaska is, well, overwhelming at times. But combining forces like that makes a lot of sense, and for a lot of different reasons. And so we have sections that show the statistics for both the Office of Law Enforcement and the Coast Guard. There's some time series there. I think that the commission asked about that maybe last year or something like that. And so you can see the most recent 3 years there. And I'm looking specifically at page 23 in table 11. That shows the Office of Law Enforcement's number of vessel boardings. The next page on table 12, page 24, gives the number of violations by category and sector. And then it characterizes those violations. We had, for example, in 2024, 394 violations that were recorded, and then it characterizes those in the next couple pages. There are a lot of, it was dominated a lot by the IFQ fishery and then also the charter halibut sector as well. I can flip ahead unless you have any questions. Again, we're running out of time, and when we do get to this section on the Coast Guard, we have very similar information. And as I mentioned, Lieutenant Commander Rasky is not here to take questions, but in either of these sections, if you have any particular issues that you'd like us to look into, we're happy to do that. And with that, that gets us through this report.
Okay. Bob?
Kurt, on these violations, halibut-related violations by NOAA, are there two that stand out where most of these violations are taking place?
Characterizing the types of violations that fall under the halibut program, the commercial halibut.
Yeah.
We're looking again at probably at table 12, and it indicates 255 violations.
Correct.
Okay. And then if you go to the very next section, the 255 violations, the categories of them are there. There's a number of categories, but we don't have specific numbers associated with those categories. And I suspect it's because in some of those violations, you're encountering issues where there's more than one violation in one incident.
Okay, I was just wondering if there was one that was standing out more than others. So that was kind of my question.
Yeah, my understanding, Commissioner Albertson, is that there was no category that was a standout there. That was a particular problem, if maybe that's what you're alluding to.
Okay. I think that brings us to the end, does it not, Kurt?
Yeah, I don't have anything else unless there are more questions.
Nope.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I will turn off the
Appreciate
microphone.
We're over to the Finance Committee. Folks want to take a 5-minute break? Or not? 5 minutes?
Should 5 or 10.
Okay, let's roll.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chair. So this agenda item is the presentation of the Finance and Administration Committee report, which was adopted via correspondence earlier today and based on the meeting that was held on Monday morning. Noting that the Finance and Administration Committee is made up of the same commissioners who the report's being read to, it is going to be quite succinct. So for those in the audience, forgive us, there is a lot of assumption of knowledge. Okay, the good news is that the meeting, I'm just going to expand this a bit so people can read it. So the good news is that there are 7 recommendations from the Finance and Administration Committee to the Commission for either noting, recommendation, or adoption. And in addition to the 7 recommendations, there was one request for additional work to be undertaken by the Secretariat, and I'll run through that as well in some detail. So my intention is to read each of the recommendations, and where there is a specific requirement for the Commission to pause and acknowledge and make a motion to adopt or approve the recommendation, I'll pass back to the Commission through the Chair. As part of the material presented, we presented the financial statement for FY 2024, and this was presented in tandem with the annual independent auditors report for 2024. The financial statement, it was a simple recommendation that the Commission note the financial statement for FY 2024 as detailed in paper 04, presented to the FAC 101. There's no need for that to be adopted per se. It just rolls into the Commission report. In terms of the annual independent auditors report, pleased to advise again, just a reminder that it was a clean audit. And the auditors appreciated the various collaboration and ongoing work with the Secretariat to audit our accounts. One thing that the FAC has recommended is that the Secretariat undertake regular assessments of the IPHC's vulnerability to key risks identified through the annual, what's called I'm probably going to get the pronunciation wrong, productivity study, which are used by auditors. And this is a new component that now we've moved from OCBOA cash basis to a FASB GAAP accounting format as well. And so unless there's any objection, we'll just roll that recommendation in so that it becomes a Commission recommendation that the Secretariat undertake this assessment work. In addition, the FAC has recommended that the Commission accept the independent external auditors report for FY 2024, and this is as detailed and provided as an appendix to paper 05 for FAC 101. And this is in accordance with Regulation 14 of the IPHC financial regulations. And I'll pause there and ask that the Commission consider accepting the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. This is admittedly, colleagues, where I need some guidance and assistance in yourselves in terms of process.
So for this, Chair, we just need a motion to accept the independent auditors report, a second, and if there's no objection, it's adopted via consensus. Thank you.
I'll make the motion to
I
accept.
am happy to second that. Thank you.
No objections, and we adopt it, accept it. Nope, that's all good. The next was the FY 2025 budget update. And so just a reminder, we update the budget in year based on 2 key things. First is the final fishery independent setline survey design that was adopted by the Commission intersessionally, as well as any other components that have been updated within the first quarter of the fiscal year, such as fixed costs that are now known for meetings, such as this meeting, D&O insurance, those kinds of things. And so they have been incorporated into an updated FY 2025 budget, and associated with that were a number of cost savings which were moved into the contingency budget line. And a reminder, the intention is not to spend those contingency budget lines, but at the end of the fiscal year to roll them into the reserve. And so with that, Chair, we're asking for that the FAC was recommended that the Commission adopt the amended FY 2025 budget. I won't read all the material. Note the additional budgetary contributions for the International Fisheries Commission Pension Fund deficit, and also to note the various components surrounding Fund 35 with the Alaska Cost Recovery Grant. And so I'll pause there again and see if there's a motion.
Thank you for that. Do we have a motion to adopt? Sure.
I'll second.
Seconded. Thank you. Any objections? Seeing none, adopted.
Thank you. Recommendation 05 was for the approval of the FY 2026 budget, as well as a noting for the FY 2027 and 2028. Noting the discussions in including the request, which I will go through in just a moment, that the Commission is going to look into a couple of the budget lines to see if there are additional savings that could be made. And once that occurs, adopt the FY 2026 budget intersessionally. And so as a result of that, the FAC is simply recommending that the Commission note the proposed FY 2026 budget. And there's no need for a motion in that regard. It will just go in as a noting in the report. Similarly to, yes.
There was a $300,000 from Canada. Is that mentioned in this, or I don't remember seeing this in here?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, it's not noted as a formal recommendation, but you are correct. It's in my notes here, and it's certainly worth passing to Canada just to highlight again the supplementary funding that Canada has offered for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey.
It is indeed in there, and it's akin to the supplementary funding provided by the United States to the FIS as well. So kudos over. Oops, clause 18.
Okay, thank you. Recommendation 06 was that the Commission note the proposed optional extra budgetary contributions for the pension fund deficit. And again, there's no need to endorse that. It is simply noting and rolling into the report of the Commission. In addition, we have the FY 2026, 27 rather, and 28 budgets that were proposed for information only. And so similarly, the FAC is simply recommending that the Commission note the tentative budgets for 2027 and 2028. And then these will go through the normal process of review and updating over the course of 2025. And the 2027 budget will be proposed at AM102 for adoption. And so no action there, it will just roll into the report as a noting. And then one of the reasons, as I was pointing out, that the FY 2026 budget is proposed for noting at this point is that the Commission has the FAC has requested that the Secretariat evaluates the following potential options for cost savings that could be considered for the FY 26 or 27 budgets. There are recognition there of the FIS funding shortfall and prudent fiscal management, which may warrant departures from past IPHC practices. So there are 4 key elements there that are listed. The first is options for restructuring future annual meetings to accomplish necessary business in a shorter time period, whether it be 3, 4, or 5 days. Options for restructuring the conference board and processor advisory board into a single subsidiary body. The intention there is to look at potential cost savings to reduce meeting space rental, associated technology support rental, secretariat staff support needed, and minimum charges for hotels, F&Bs. And engaging a team of members from the conference board and PAB to advise the Commission on a potential new structure that would ensure both processor and harvester perspectives are fairly represented and conveyed to the Commission. In addition, options for using more economical venues for future annual meetings and any other potential cost savings that the Secretariat may identify for future annual meetings. And I'll pause there because I think there may or may not need any additional highlighting for the audience. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. Are there additional items that we should be highlighting here? John?
Not really additional, but just to amplify the need for socialization of this with folks on the conference board and the processor advisory board, recognizing that there may be quite a lot of questions, concerns about this departure from past practice. So I suspect each of the commissioners individually will be engaged in some of those discussions. And really, this is, from my standpoint, a necessity given the Commission's financial circumstances and just trying to look broadly at opportunities for cost savings.
Neil?
I agree with everything John has said. I do think we should give some thought to whether that is the only driver. In other words, were our situation to improve in the future, would we go back to, you know, a 2-board model? And I don't know that that's the way I have thought about this. And so if we're upfront about that in the socialization, which I think is very important, that might be a key message, just so we don't mislead people to thinking this is temporary. At least in my view, it would not be a temporary a measure.
Yeah, that I agree completely. And I think the FAC minutes capture that well, that it's the FIS funding shortfall and prudent fiscal management as the drivers here. So it is not just the current budget circumstance. Thanks for that clarification.
Fully agree with all those points. So I think we're.
And that concludes the presentation of the report. Thank you, Chair.
And that culminates our day's business. And tomorrow is an, I don't know how to couch it. It's an off day. Caucus day. There we go. I'm not banging the gavel. So thank you all. We're done for this afternoon. And there is an information session, as I recall, but I don't have that right in front of me on the FIS. That is at 5 o'clock, if memory serves, in this room. So some of you may be back in here. To the rest, escape while you can. That is for skippers. Yeah. Thanks all.